The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. I'm Ginny Van Dusen, Director of Alumni Career Development at Holy Cross, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. This is the next installment in our series of web-based presentations covering a broad range of career development topics. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Nacy Carson Pereira, Holy Cross Class of 2007, and owner at Working Life Enterprises, offering business and brand building for individuals and companies of all sizes. In her presentation today, entitled The Primary Audience, The Relationship Between Brand, Success, and Self, Nacy will take us on a psychological, sociological, and personal exploration of the relationship between these key areas. We'll be together for a little under an hour. Nacy will speak, and then we'll take questions from you, our listeners, for as long as time allows. I encourage you to submit questions throughout this presentation by checking out the question function located on your webinar toolbar to the right. Thank you for joining us. And now it's my pleasure to turn things over to Nacy.
Great. Thank you so much, Jenny. And hello, Holy Cross alumni, wherever you might be today. It's 12 o'clock Holy Cross time here on the East Coast. And I just want to wish our basketball team the best of luck this evening. It's so exciting to see them be so successful. We are here to talk about branding today. And what I want to caution everybody before we start is that this is not going to be the perhaps traditional approach to personal branding or professional branding that maybe you've encountered before. We're not going to be focused today on things like very functional pieces like what should my job title be and how does my resume look. What we're going to do today is talk about all the things that you need to do before we get to that point. In fact, the foundational premise for our work that I'm sharing with you today is that the primary audience for our professional brands must always be ourselves first and foremost as professionals. I know that flies in the face of, I think, what a lot of people would consider the value of a brand to be. We think of brands as very externally focused, externally facing things that get pushed out into the world. But I would like to challenge our thinking on that today, and you can tell me at the end if I've proved my point and convinced you of this, that actually the real function of a brand must first start to be reflected inward before it can ever be successfully reflected outward. The agenda that we have here for our time today is that first I'm going to start by addressing some of the questions that you shared during the registration process. We're going to talk a little bit about the background of the work and how I ended up in this particular space. We'll define what a brand means. That's a word that there's a lot of different kinds of definitions for, so let's own that definition together today. We're going to talk about how you, right away, as soon as this webinar ends, can actually start to be making headways in improving your own brand by identifying your brand anchors. I'm going to give you a little bit of homework because as Holy Cross students, we are all overly ambitious, so we have to have some homework. And we're also going to have a little bit of time for some of your questions and perhaps your reflections on this process. I do want to thank everybody who submitted their questions ahead of time. We got lots of really great questions about brands as part of the registration process. And in fact, we had like 120 people register, which was really exciting. I want to talk a little bit about right now what we're going to do today and what we're not going to do today, so that those of you who kind of had specific questions will understand I'm not snubbing you and we're not going in a different direction. The things that we are going to address here that a lot of you brought up are how a brand works in terms of someone who's transitioning their market or their career. We're going to talk about the relationship of brands and reputation a little bit. We'll talk about brand adaptability. Someone asked a great question to the effect of, how does my brand grow with me over time? We're going to talk about your brands and life experience. So somebody says, you know, I had a really interesting experience in my personal life. Does that have anything to do with my professional life? We'll talk about that. We're also going to talk about the relationship between your brands and work-life balance. One of the things I think that all of us share on the call today, I'm the class of 2007, as Ginny said, but I noticed we had registrants at the class of 1968 all the way through the class of 2015. What I would say that we all share, or I would assume we all share, is this holistic approach to our lives, this comprehensive approach to the world that we live in and how we interact with it. I think that's one of the most special things about being a Holy Cross student, and one of the things I've taken away very strongly from my experience on the Hill is that things are not just black and white. They're not functional. They're all interrelated, and they're all influencing each other. And part of that is work and life and brands. Some of the things that people ask about that unfortunately this particular topic is not directly going to address, but may tangentially address, are things like, how do I design my logo? Or how do I name my business? Or how do I create a social media strategy for my brand? Or another one which is very good is, I'm at a particular point in my working life. I'm starting out, I'm in my 50s, I'm at the end of my career. How do I manage my brand at this point in my life? We're going to talk about some of these things indirectly, but we won't really have a chance to deal with those specific concerns on this call. What I would say to all of you out there, whether your questions will or will not be addressed, is please do not hesitate to reach out to me at all. I love Holy Cross. I'm like a Holy Cross super fan, and I'm also a Holy Cross super fan of other alumni. So whether or not you want to talk about branding or something specific or a problem you're having in your career, I'm going to say it now. Please do not hesitate to reach out to me. I love being a resource for Holy Cross alums. So I wanted to include my picture here not as like a vanity picture, but because some people might recognize my face and not put it to the name or vice versa. So that's me. I graduated from Holy Cross in 2007 with a degree in history. I loved being a history major. I loved it so much I can't even tell you. I had Professor Ross Beals as my advisor all through school, and being a history major was a transformational experience for me. When I graduated school, though, I wasn't really fully prepared to move into the job market, and that wasn't Holy Cross's fault. But I was so immersed in being a history major, by the time it was senior year and I'd finished up my honors thesis and all the different award ceremonies were done, it suddenly occurred to me that, okay, I have to find a way to translate this into something that will make it so I don't live in my parents' basement for the rest of my life. No offense to any of you out there who are actually living in your parents' basement. So I ended up getting a job at a financial software company. Now, from a history major, you might say, wow, this is a great example of what a liberal arts degree allows us to do, right? We can go from history to financial software in one giant leap, and it's magical. And it is magical because this experience really is the start of how brands became personal to me. After about, I don't know, I'd say 6 or 7 months in my role in the QA department of this really nice little company. It was a great company. I really started to feel an itch that something wasn't quite right. Over time, the more I kind of explored that feeling, the more upset it made me, and the more I realized that there was a fundamental mismatch between who I was as a professional, what I could offer, and what I wanted to offer, and the role that I was in. And that was a really jarring experience for me. And I'm sure those of you who have been in the workforce for some time probably remember that first moment that you ended up in a job that you were like, oh boy, this is not a great fit. And for those of you, perhaps younger alumni, it will happen, and it's okay when it happens. But nobody had really prepared me for this. And I remember it being a very jarring and frustrating experience. I think as a Holy Cross student as well, I cared a lot about being the best I could be, about being an achiever. And so I'd never been in a situation like that before where I didn't necessarily want to achieve in the role that I was in. It was all very disturbing. But I realized that the only thing I could do was to transition out of that role. So after about a year or so, I decided to take the leap, and I left that role and started freelance writing. Again, that was just very difficult because everybody tells you how to get that first job out of school, but nobody tells you what to do if it's not a fit. So I started freelance writing, and I took a lot of different odd jobs in the beginning, but really tend to gravitate towards those in the area of professional development, organizational development. And I realized after a few years of this that I was really continue to be fascinated by this relationship of the human to their work. And perhaps it's also a very Holy Cross approach to work. But this idea that we are not separated from the work that we do. We are not widgets or machines that kind of can punch in and punch out. That the work we did impacted the life we led and vice versa. And I've really, my whole career, I think you could say, has really been kind of built around the study and the research and the application of that one question, which is, how do we work effectively and how do we work effectively for our life? And those are interrelated but different things. As a result of this, I started to do some research. It was very first and then got a little bit more focused for about 2 years between 2009 and 2011, which ended up being the foundation for the book I published with Josie Bass in 2012 on how professionals can adapt to changing job market conditions. The name of the book is called The Finch Effects. You can look it up on Amazon or in your local Barnes & Noble. And I love doing that research. I got to talk to all kinds of people around the country. I talked to people who had lost their jobs, people who had lost their jobs and then found their real calling in life, financial analysts, HR specialists, you name it, I talked to it. And of course, this is all happening in the backdrop of the recession. And one of the key things that really emerged was the importance of brand. And what I found is that the people who were thriving in the changing job market were people who really had a sense of ownership and control over their own brand. But the difference is that it wasn't brand in terms of how their resume looked or the color of the suit they wore to their job interviews. It was something much deeper and much more substantial than that. And what was so interesting to me is that, you know, when the book was published, it was all about adaptability, professional adaptability, and I really thought, everybody was going to want to talk about the work around adaptability. But the truth is, everybody just wanted to know more about branding. And that really said something to me, this hunger to understand branding as something more and to apply it in a very personal way. It just emerged so much more strongly out of the book. So over the years, I've continued to work in the branding area. It's been a great kind of crux of these different issues that I care very deeply about. And I'm very privileged now because I get to work with businesses of all sizes, as Jenny said. A division of my business focuses on providing media services and branding services for micro businesses. So how do we make branding and media accessible for truly micro businesses? And then the other side of my work is that I get to kind of consult with companies globally, actually, on how are they organizing their messaging and sharing that with the world. So it's been a great experience, an unexpected one, but that's really the background of the work today. So as we move forward, a question we need to ask ourselves is this: how can we define the term brand? And as you can see here, I've pulled together about 100 words are here, if you can believe that, about branding, or that come up in different definitions of brand. So some of these things are obviously familiar. The word brand itself is there. Job, products, customers, differentiate, market. All of these words kind of swirl around this vortex of what a brand means. And to be fair, we have two different types of branding that we need to acknowledge. We have branding in the sense of brand identity, which is the very visual aesthetic of an organization. So it's like the Coca-Cola logo or the little ba-da-ba-ba-ba that McDonald's does. These are all parts of their traditional brand. But we all know, and why we're all here on the call, is that brand has come to mean something more, something deeper, something more of depth than just market competitiveness and color choices. So I present to you this definition of brand. This is a working definition of a brand in the professional sense. What I'll say is that it's one that evolves in my perspective. So 3 years ago, I might have given you a slightly different perspective on it because This is an evolving field. It's very exciting. I would say that a good definition of brand for us is that our professional brands are the impactful and consistent communication of our value, mission, and experience to our target market. Okay, I'm going to say that one more time. Our professional brands are the impactful and consistent communication of our value, mission, and experience to our target market. Now, target market is not something we're going to talk a lot about today. Target market, that is the external market, because the implicit information here is that the primary market is ourselves, right? Back to my premise for this discussion. When we talk about target market for professionals, that tends to mean one of about three things. It could be employers for a job you don't have. It could be employers for the job you do have, or it can be your clients. So if you're looking for a job, have a job you want to do better in, or looking for clients, those are examples of target markets, or kind of categories of a target market, okay? We're not going to talk more about that today. It's something that is an essential piece of building your brand, and I'd be happy to share more about that with anybody who'd like to discuss that off the webinar. How can we use brands, right? So why are we talking about professional brands? Clearly all of you are here for a reason. Some of you have shared why you're here through the questions you ask. But I would venture you're here for one of a few reasons. You're here because you're asking yourself, where am I going? This future direction. You're at a crossroads of some kind and you're saying, well, what should I do next? You're feeling conflicted. You're feeling like there's too many demands on you, and you're trying to understand what is really worth doing. Where is my focus really supposed to be? Maybe you're feeling overwhelmed and stressed, and you say, why am I doing this? Why am I even doing this? Maybe you're at an opportunity and you're saying, how can I get more out of this opportunity? Maybe that more is money. Maybe that more is time off. Maybe that more is something related to experience or training. Maybe it's something about how can I make better contacts? How can I communicate with people better about my value? Or maybe it's about how can I make today count even more? These are all different things that I would say your brand, when you have a solid one, will help you answer all of these questions. To me, at its core, a brand provides a litmus test. It becomes the thing that we hold up opportunities to, that we pose questions to, that we consider things in the light of. Because when that brand is solid, when it is clear, when it is well articulated, it becomes, to use an incredibly cliche concept, a little bit of a North Star. It becomes something bigger than us, even though it's within us. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes, but it's an extremely important tool, and it's a tool that we use in life and in our work. So how can we use brands? Now, just as an emphasis here, this is all how you as the individual can use your brand, you as the primary market. None of these very important things have anything to do with competing or anything that we would consider to be kind of an external value of a brand. So back to my premise, I would say that this set of questions here is as good of a piece of information as any to reinforce this idea that we need to be the primary audience for our brand. Okay? Just this question here. These are the questions of our life. These are the questions of life. If those questions as being things that you can do well with a brand are not enough, I'd like to share with you a couple of symptoms of an unclear brand. So people who haven't taken the time to really develop a professional brand in the way that you and I have defined it today, they tend to have these symptoms, right? So a really common one that I see all the time in my work, with clients, is I see an inconsistency in presentation. So on their resume, they might have a little blurb that defines them one way, and then they use similar but different language to define themselves on their LinkedIn profile, right? So that's sort of a nuanced inconsistency, but it's an inconsistency nonetheless. Holy Cross students don't have this problem quite as much, but I also run into this issue. People are trying to promote two different brands simultaneously. So for example, someone's Twitter profile might be like DJ HC, you know, for their wedding DJ business. But then their LinkedIn profile is really focused on them being perhaps like a bank manager or something completely different. Sometimes these are not necessarily purposeful. So perhaps the Facebook page, which you think is private, is showing you doing a lot of things that maybe you wouldn't want your employer to know you did, like knitting shirts for chihuahuas or something like that. It doesn't have to be cake stands. It can be something as like, you know, like I'm a 3D puzzle enthusiast and I'm afraid my employer might judge me for that, right? So these are inconsistencies that are out there. And it happens all the time. And what happens is that when one of your markets, right, one of your target markets is learning about your brand, they're going to Google you. They're going to ask people about you, right? They're going to try to find information. And it does tend to be very disturbing or unsettling in some way if people are inconsistent in how they're presenting themselves. People who don't have a really clear brand tend to express a lack of clarity about where they're going. So these are people who kind of go from one job to another. They kind of fall into new jobs, and they feel like there's a little bit of like whimsy or unpredictability to what they're doing. Things come up and they take advantage of them. There's not a lot of clarity or thought that goes into it. These people don't necessarily have a very clear brand either. Now these three archetypes I have here, pleaser, imposter, or the over-adapter, I'll just say a quick word about each of these. These are very specific types of misuses of brand or unclear brands I see all the time. The pleaser is someone who has a brand that is very transient and is reformed constantly based on what they think the person they're talking to wants it to be. So these are people who they go into job interviews and all they're listening for is cues for them to follow about telling them what they are. Now, of course, that's actually a very decent job interview skill, right? You want to be creating obvious links between your skill set, your values, and the company that you're working for. These are people who only do the latter part of that. They only care about trying to be what they think the company wants them to be or the market wants them to be. The imposter is someone who totally exaggerates or blows up the experiences they've had to try to make themselves look better, but it's completely hollow. So these are people who maybe interned one summer at Harvard Business School, and they tell everybody that the summer they were at Harvard Business School, whatever. I'm sure all of us know at least one person like that. That's a symptom of a very unclear brand. That person has no sense of their own value, so they sort of build up this image that may or may not be based in reality, but is not helpful. The over-adapter is kind of a version of the pleaser in that they are overly adaptable to new situations without a core thread. Now, this is less purposefully adaptive. They're not kind of tell me who you want me to be and I'll be that. But they're more, okay, I guess I'm this person now. Okay, I guess I'm doing this now. So those are three archetypes I tend to run into all the time. Another one which is common is people have embarrassment or are kind of reticent to share their professional experience. So I get a lot of folks who come and work with me who say things like, you know, I spent about 4 summers working at a Dairy Queen when I was unemployed. I don't really want to talk about that. I don't want to tell people about that. Or, well, I was doing this type of work for a while and then I pivoted and started doing something totally different, so I don't even want to talk about that other work. Or I'm afraid to tell anybody I did that. That's a symptom of an unclear brand. So these are all things you might recognize them in yourself, or you might recognize them in people that you know. But the bottom line is that unclear brands typically lead to bad things. So let's start to clarify how you can work on developing your professional brand so you don't end up being in any one of those bullet points. I'd like to share with you this anatomy of a professional brand. This is my model that I've put together over the years. It's one that I continue to tinker with and I change, and I present it to you here for your consideration. I posit to you that a professional brand is really made up of 3 items. The closest in is your brand anchors. This is really the core of what your professional brand is. This is kind of the heart of everything that you're doing. This is the core. And this is actually where we're going to spend most of our time today, starting here. The next layer out is what I like to call your brand narrative. Now, I know narrative has sort of become co-opted as a buzzword and gets used quite a bit these days, so I beg you to look past that and see it for what it really is, which is the weaving together of all of these nuances and facets of your work and of your life. This is your experience, your reputation, any personal sufferings you've had or personal experiences that have shaped you, the education you got, skills, your perspective on the world and what you offer. The farthest out, and if we think of this as being, I kind of like to think of it as being like a peanut M&M. So this is like the candy coloring on the outside, is your brand communication. So this is all the stuff that we tend to see about somebody's brand. This is what their website looks like. This is their way that they communicate on social media. This is the name they've chosen for their business. That's the outside, so that would make the narrative kind of the chocolate and the brand anchors the beautiful peanut on the inside. And I've just made myself extremely hungry. But let's take a look at these individually. So I wanted to start with the outer layer, the kind of candy shell here, because this is without fail where everybody wants to start talking. Everybody wants to start talking about their brand communication. People come to me all the time and say, I need to update my LinkedIn profile, or I want to redo my website. I get that all the time. People want to redo their website. Or I'm going into a job interview. Can you help me prep questions? And unfortunately, what I always tend to say to people is no, because that is the ending of the brand development process. It's not the beginning. Right? So starting with that is you can't build that M&M from the candy coating in. It has to be the other way around. This is driven by your narrative and your anchors. One of the best ways we can overcome that consistency issue is by having this be a reflection of the deeper layers in the process. Okay? So the other thing too is that what this beautiful candy shell of the brand, what this is driven by is also what's appropriate for your industry, your level of business, what your competitors are doing, and what your country practices are. So for example, in different countries, different social media outlets are more popular than others. Okay, so for example, in Brazil, where my husband is from, Facebook and WhatsApp are huge tools that lots of people are using to drive business. Here in the United States, you could argue that while Facebook is an important part of brand communication, things like LinkedIn, maybe even YouTube, have more impact these days. It's an evolved market. It's a different market. The level that you're at is also really important. If you're talking to executives are probably going to be on LinkedIn over Snapchat. Maybe not all, but some, for the most part, right? So how you communicate your brand, how you choose to do that is influenced by all of these factors, okay? But if you don't take anything away from this talk today, I hope you'll take away this, that these things are the end of your thought process. It's not the beginning. If you make this beginning, you are just going to end up making an empty candy shell, okay? This is really important. The brand narrative. This is probably the most expansive part of what a professional brand is built by. everything is fair game here. And when I say everything is fair game, I mean who you went to school with as a child, what your grandmother used to tell you on your birthday, your favorite professor in college, all of these experiences that have shaped and influenced your perspective on the world, how you think about things, why you've made the choices you've made. All of these things are fair game to be part of the brand narrative. So for those of you who had sent questions ahead of time about how does my personal life relate to my brand, this is exactly where it comes in. If you've had something you've overcome, that can be part of your brand narrative. Okay. Again, this is also going to be led by the layer underneath it. The chocolate, like how disappointing is it to eat a peanut M&M and find out there's no peanut in the middle, right? So we have a candy shell, we have a chocolate layer, all of which are built on this foundation of the peanut, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Your brand narrative is a living story. It's a living narrative. It's something that changes over time. So as you age, as you have more life experiences, as you do different types of work, your narrative is going to grow and evolve. It's going to encompass different things. What your brand narrative at 22 is not what your brand narrative at 42 is going to be. But what's important here is that the brand anchors, the things that sort of hold all this together, those will likely be very similar or the same. And therefore, the story that you tell at 22 and the evolved story you tell at 42 will have a core of coming from the same human's experience. That's very important. The brand narrative, I would also posit, and unfortunately we're not going to have a lot of time to discuss this today, this is where competitive differentiation is made. Now remember, your brand communication, your LinkedIn profile, for example, that is a direct result of your narrative. That's coming from this narrative place. You're not getting competitive differentiation in your brand communication for the most part. That's just a tool that you're using. It's the tools you use to communicate the differentiation which comes from this level. I'm going to say something that probably a lot of people here are going to disagree with, but I stand by it. The biggest competitive differentiation every single one of us has on this call is the narrative that we build of our experience, our perspective, and our mission. All those things that at different points in our career we're told are big competitive differentiators, in the true global scope, and we are working in a global economy, are not as competitive as we think they might be, okay? So having a degree from Holy Cross is important. And as it influences our narrative, is extremely competitive. But how many other Holy Cross graduates are there in the world? How many Holy Cross graduates may be competing for similar types of roles or clients as you? Okay? We can see this even with people who are going on to get higher degrees, right? A bachelor's degree today is no longer as competitive as it was maybe 30 years ago. An MBA today is more table stakes in a lot of industries now than it is a competitive differentiator, because so many people have it, right? So many people have it. There are very few things that are so exclusive that it becomes a competitive differentiator by itself. The only true competitive differentiation each one of us has is the unique combination of perspective, experience, education, all these items we say go into the brand narrative. That's what we all have. Nobody can take that from us. Nobody can really compete directly with it. So sure, all the credentials you have are important and meaningful, but when it comes to competitive differentiation, they can only take you so far. This is the rest of that road. This is the rest of that road. This is where it's made. Your brand anchors here. The peanut in your peanut M&M. And I just realized we might have some people online that have a peanut allergy, in which case I'm super sorry. We could probably use a guacamole or an avocado analogy, and that might have actually been a little bit better. I'll remember that for the next time. The brand anchor here, this is the core of your brand. And what's so funny is that, like the core of most things, it's deceptively small. It's 1 to 3 terms or phrases that summarize all of this that we've been discussing. Anybody here who's a fan of the movie Inception, like I am, consider this to be your dream totem, okay? When everything else is stripped away, when your LinkedIn profile is blank, when your narrative has yet to be written, these brand anchors are the start of everything. These are words that you are going to own, not just in your own mind, but in the mind of your target market. This is the core. When we talk about who we are, right, and this goes to, as Holy Cross students, I think you'll all understand and appreciate this. This is not functionally driven, okay? So a lot of people think their brand anchors are things like manager, right, or something functionally related, accountant. That's not true. This is what is there when you take away everything else. Who are we all as individuals in teeny little peanut-sized bites? An important note here is that your brand anchors are authentic and actual, not aspirational. A lot of times when I work with people through this process, they choose anchors that are not necessarily reflective of who they are today, but who they want to be tomorrow. Or, even worse in some sense, who they've seen a competitor saying they are. Now, when I work with businesses on sort of developing their business identity, I always say that you have to hold off on competitor research until you understand your business model and your brand first. Because competitive research has a very serious place, obviously, in successful business building, but it's amazing how much we can be influenced by competitors and how much we can absorb from what they're doing, and how the process of building what we're actually here to share and provide is impacted and impinged upon by a subconscious vetting process based on what we've seen our competitors do. I would say to you, if we look at the true innovators in the world, the people who have truly made an impact, so, you know, not to use it, but I'm going to use it, Steve Jobs, Richard Branson, these people are true individuals. They are concerned with their opinion first and then their competitor's opinion second, okay? For you and me, maybe perhaps the next Richard Branson is on this call. I don't know. If you are, hey, remember me. But what I would say is for you and me, the same things apply. The same things apply. To build a good brand, we have to start in a vacuum. Again, the primary audience is ourselves. And in fact, brand anchors are so important that that's what we're going to spend the remainder of the presentation portion of this webinar talking about how to do. How do you start to identify your brand anchors? Clearly, they have a huge place of importance, which can seem overwhelming. I have sort of a simple process that I'm going to walk you through now. I'm going to give you a little homework based on this, okay? So the first thing that you have to do is a brainstorming session. So this is to take all of the terms that you associate with yourself as a personal and a professional, as a person, not a personal, as a person and a professional. And also, you can use words that people have associated to you. Okay, so if you've ever had a Myers-Briggs or a DISC profile or company reviews, whatever. These are all great places to start pulling ideas for this sort of initial brain dump of terms. Okay, so I put a list together here of, however many this is, 16 words or whatever, that tend to be the most commonly used. When I do this in a workshop, it's great because everybody kind of takes a couple of minutes to do an initial brain dump, and then we put them all up on the board. And these are some of the real common ones that we see, okay? What you'll probably notice as the astute Holy Cross student that you are is that these words, while they are descriptive, are also extremely overused, okay? So that's not really getting to the core of anything. It's just still too surface. How many people out there describe themselves as a team player or fun or ambitious, okay? These are not really unique terms that are at the root of your unique experience. So we can't stop here. We can't stop here. And just a note, we want to be brainstorming positive words. You wouldn't believe the number of times I walk people through this and they put negative words on the list. I don't know why they do that, but I now have to tell people, make sure that you use positive words that are authentic to who you are today, okay? The second step is you pick one of these words, you take a look at your brainstorm list, and you say, you know what, this word, I feel good about this word. I feel like it's true, it's real, and I would like to be seen this way. So for the sake of an example, we're going to use innovative, okay? So I might look at this list and say, okay, I'd like to work with innovative. Great. We're going to do a word map of innovative because what's so interesting about words, and we saw this when we talked about brands a couple minutes ago, right? Brand. Every word means something slightly different to you and to me, okay? So when I look at innovative, here are just a couple of examples of words and phrases I associate with innovation, okay, or someone who is innovative. Maybe they're tech-oriented, someone who's an inventor, someone on the cutting edge, MacGyver, you know. Again, you don't want to censor this process, but what I want you to do is I want you to kind of take that word that you choose to work with, put it at the center of this word map, and just put as many spokes out as you can about what you mean when you say that word, okay? And many words like innovative have many, many layers to them. I mean, look at all the different directions that I could be implying when I say I'm innovative. Let's say for the sake of argument, I look at this list and I say, I think what I really mean is resilient. When I say I'm innovative, I'm really trying to say that I'm scrappy, that I'm a resilient person. Okay, now that's the important thing you have to do is you have to look at the word map and you say to yourself, are any of the words, any of these other meanings that I've shared, more what I'm trying to say? Take it to the next level, okay? And then we do it again, okay? We do it again. So I put resilient down and I said, okay, that means I'm adaptable, I'm capable, I can overcome obstacles, I can bounce back. It means I'm positive in the face of adversity, okay? Positive in the face of adversity. And I look at that and I say, you know, I really think positive in the face of adversity is what I'm really trying to say, okay? Now really, what we could do this as many layers as we need to. What I would then say is we positive in the face of adversity. We put that in the middle and we kind of scope that out until you get to a level where you say, you know what, I think I've taken this as deep as it can go. This is it. This is the right word. You'll have a feeling. I wish I could give you a more scientific, a more scientific metric, but you'll feel when you've kind of hit the bottom of what you really mean. One thing that will happen is that maybe you'll put positive in adversity and you'll get all these other definitions kind of off it and you'll say, no, I'm going in the direction, I'm moving away from my original intention. You'll feel it. Positive in the face of adversity, okay. So I want to show you, this is actually a real word map that I did with a client at a workshop not too long ago. They started with innovative and they got to positive in the face of adversity. And I share this with you because it's a great example of how we don't think a lot about the language we use. Even thoughtful people like us, I think that there's a way in which we use accessible language, we use language we can get our arms around. But there are so many different implications of what that means to us. You really don't know where that's going to take you. And so the best way to move away from those really generic, buzzworthy terms is to word map it until you get to, well, this is what I'm really trying to say. I mean, look at the distance between that. Innovative to positivity in the face of adversity. Distant cousins, sure, but not first cousins, not even siblings. Okay? Now the question is, what do we do with this anchor, okay? we've got this anchor now. We've figured out an anchor is positivity in the face of adversity. So I've sort of put together here a reverse M&M, if you will. If positivity in the face of adversity is our anchor, that's our beautiful peanut in the middle, the narrative, the chocolatey layer of the brand, might draw on stories in our past about a time when you managed layoffs at a company you worked for. That might be a really important part of the narrative that you shape. Or if you're somebody who has had a difficult physical experience or a personal experience, positivity in that experience might be woven into this narrative. It might become part of the story that you tell. And the story that you tell gives you the link that you need to put that beautiful candy shell on your brand. Okay, so the candy shell from someone who has positivity in the face of adversity is the peanut. When you look at their LinkedIn profile, you might see terms like adversity tested, grit. They're people of grit. They perseveres in the face of things. When they do that summary that I think everybody kind of dreads doing on LinkedIn, you might see that kind of language. And so the experience for you as somebody on the outside looking at this brand is looking at these terms, these candy shell terms, adversity tested, grit, perseverance. They're sort of a little bit different than your normal business speak. They're not so different that they're different for the sake of being different, but they are differentiated from probably what a lot of people are going to use when they describe themselves. Because it's a step deeper, it's a step removed from typical buzzwords. And this is how it works. This is how we build from the inside out. We use our brand anchors as building blocks to inform our narrative. And from the narrative directly comes the communication of our brand. Now, I wish we had time to talk more about the narrative piece and the candy-coated shell, the communication piece of this, but unfortunately we don't, and I wanted to give you guys something to actually work with and a place to start. Because I think the reason all of us are here is because we're feeling like there is something more to brand. It can do more for us. It can be more for us. It can impact our working lives more directly, but we don't know where to start. And somehow I think you've sneakily known that starting with your LinkedIn profile is not the right place to start. So the homework I want to give you guys is I want you to work on, over the next week, identifying at least one brand descriptor using the method we worked through today. Okay, just to recap, it's the brainstorm of terms that reflect who you are now. It's the word mapping to get to the deepest one. Something I think is very important is I want you to take your time with this. This is not a timed assignment in the sense that you don't have to hand it in at the end of class. Part of this experience, again, the primary audience, it's a journey of self. It's a journey of reflection, and it's a journey of organizing everything to date. So take your time with that. Don't rush it. Once you identify what that brand descriptor is, set it aside for a couple of days, and then take a look at it again. And then the last piece of your homework assignment is I want you to tell me about it. I want you to tell me what your descriptor was. I want you to tell me where you're having problems. I want you to tell me what the process felt like for you. I want you to tell me if you think I'm full of it. Tell me about it. I'm going to check in with you in a week to remind you, kind of ping you, but over this week, I want you to do these things. To kind of close out and frame up our questions, I wanted to revisit the premise that we had at the beginning of our webinar today, which is the primary audience for our professional brands must always be ourselves first and foremost. These brands need to be built from the inside out, not from the outside in. They need to be built with you in mind, because the truth is your target market, whomever they might be, they're only going to see snippets and wisps of the brand over time. You live with your brand all day, every day. Your brand looks at you in the mirror in the morning. It faces you when you sit down to do your email. It's there all the time. We live with our brands more than anybody else ever will. So it's important for us to be our most productive, our most successful, our most fulfilled, that those brands are brands that mean something to us first. Give us direction, give us focus, give us a sense of value and clarity before they can ever mean anything to anyone else. I'm going to turn it back over to Ginny. I've got my contact information here for anybody who would like to get in touch with me between now and a week. Please don't hesitate to do so. But otherwise, if we have any questions, Ginny, I'd love to answer them.
We do have a couple. We had a couple of people chime in to say that they love peanut M&Ms. So I don't think you bothered anyone there.
Wunderbar.
So one of the questions we received is the poet Robert Burns wrote that it would be helpful to have the ability to see ourselves as others see us. How will or how can we get this kind of self-reflection?
Can you say that one more time?
Sure. So the poet Robert Burns wrote that it would be helpful to have the ability to see ourselves as others see us. How will we get this self-reflection?
So that's a great question. And I think that there are a lot of great tools out there that we can all access. I think Myers-Briggs and DISC profiles, for example, behavioral profiles are excellent places to start with that because they give you a way to ask direct questions of other people. So perhaps if your profile says that you're judgmental, you can ask the people close to you and say, yeah, I had this profile done and it says I'm judgmental. Is that how you see me? As opposed to just sitting down and saying, so tell me what you think of when you think of me, right? I mean, that's kind of like, who's really going to get a good answer from doing that? Another suggestion are 360 assessments, either formally or informally. There's a lot of companies that offer 360 assessments for their employees. You can buy them online, the systems to do that, or you can also conduct your own informal one through something as simple as setting up like SurveyMonkey, where you put very specific questions in and people can anonymously answer them for you. I think that those are some great tools that can really be part of this, what is the feedback other people have given me, place to start when we kind of lay all those terms and phrases out in the first phase of the brainstorm.
Okay. Next question. How do I brand consistently but separately when I am part of one company in IT but building my own brand as a personal life coach?
Well, what I would say to whomever shared that question is you can't. in the sense that my working theory is that what makes you good at your job in IT is going to make you good at your job in personal coaching. Is that what it was, life coaching you said, Jenny?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'd say that the fundamental value that you bring to your work in IT, or that even led you into IT, is consistent with the story that you're writing for yourself in personal coaching. I love questions like this. I get these all the time. The best thing I would say is that if you have a specific question like this, to contact me and we can work it out together more directly. It's hard, with a lack of information. But my overarching answer to this is always, you are the same person. You are drawing from the same well of experience, perspective, etc., to do both of these jobs. And I think that there's a more consistent brand that covers both than you think. Now, the actual question of, I'm setting up a website for my personal coaching, how do I do that? Again, that's that beautiful candy shell, which is directly related to whatever you determine your anchors and your narrative to be.
Okay, here's another question. If the words you come up with in this exercise don't seem to match what you do in your professional life, what does that mean for how you should develop yourself and your brand? For example, if nurturing is a key word, but you are not in a helping profession, where is the connection?
That's a great question, whoever asked that. Thank you so much. Again, it would be one of those things that I'd say, if we look at the narrative, I would say that, like, unless you're some kind of like a exterminator, I suppose. I don't know. You are probably nurturing in some fashion in whatever your role happens to be. There's very few times I come across people who have a particular function that is so 180 degrees away from their terms. This is where sort of developing that brand narrative really comes in, which is how do we make those links. And one thing we didn't get a chance to talk too much about today, but I want to be very clear on, is I don't really subscribe to touchy-feely branding, right? So there's, I think, the personal brand movement, which is very much like a lot of woo-woo words. I think that your brand can be very personal and very appropriate for use in business. And so I think that it's just a matter in your narrative of weaving those things together, and I bet you would see that you actually are nurturing something or someone in the role that you're in. Again, as long as you're not an exterminator, in which we should probably have a discussion about your career choices.
All right, here's a question from one of our peanut M&M enthusiasts. Does this process continue through my career and life? How do I continue to update my brand? I am class of 66, and you make me think that this should be an ongoing process.
Excellent. Then you have heard me loud and clear. That makes me so happy. It should be an ongoing process. I think that the best way to handle this as an ongoing process, because we have to finish the branding process and move on to do the work at hand, right? That's the tension we have here. Some people build in on a yearly basis or a quarterly basis. They have days in their little calendars that they flag as being reflection days, where they take their brands and they review them and they say, okay, is this up to date? Is this reflective of what I'm doing? Personally, I find New Year's and my birthday, for whatever reason, as being real natural reflection points in my life. And so I would say whatever feels natural to you, whatever feels good to you, build that in and consciously make time at an interval that feels doable for you. And that's how it's going to evolve over time, and you're going to stay engaged.
Great. All right. Unfortunately, I think we've come to the end of our time for questions. As Nacy mentioned, she is available for follow-up questions. Her contact information is there. We can also share that after the fact. Many thanks to Nacy for sharing her time and knowledge with us today, and thank you, our listeners, for joining us. A recording of this presentation will be available on the Alumni Career Development website by next week. Very likely it'll be by the end of this week. I will send an email out to everyone who attended and registered to let you know when it's available and include the link. Also, be on the lookout for a follow-up email from Nacy checking in. One other note, you will also receive a short email survey about the webinar, and I encourage you to share your feedback with us. It's very important. If you have any follow-up questions related to this webinar or others, please feel free to reach out to me in the alumni office. And I hope everyone enjoyed this. Again, Nacy, thank you, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, Jenny.